What's going on, guys? Michael here from TYT YuGiOh, and I have in front of me some cards that are not commons, finally. And that is because I have a very special topic to discuss with you guys today, and that topic is obviously tempo. So a lot of players I've found don't really understand what tempo is and how to use it to their advantage or disadvantage, and how you can use the concept to affect your play, and really just overall why it's important. So first, I'm going to talk about a little bit what tempo is, and then how to use the knowledge of tempo to help affect your play. So the most basic way that I can explain the concept of tempo is whether you are currently winning the game or you are losing the game. All right, so it's the status of basically how you're doing compared to your opponent. So this can be based off of a number of factors. The first and most obvious one is life points. If you have more life points than your opponent, generally you're probably winning the game, unless you just soul charged for 5 or something and then have a ridiculous board. But that brings me into my next sort of defining factor of tempo, which is board presence. If you have a really strong board, if you randomly somehow have all these monsters on the board, that's it's pretty good. So obviously you're probably gonna be winning the game at that point if you manage to set that up. And then last thing is card economy. How many cards you have in your hand versus your opponent, how high is your ceiling compared to them, and how much more can you do. So what do you do with that knowledge? Once you determine whether you're winning or losing the game, what do you do with that knowledge? So you do this. If you're winning, you need to play defensively. And what I mean by that is you don't want to push for maximum damage. I mean, unless you can OTK your opponent, obviously, then, that's sort of another thing. But generally, if you're winning the game, right, you have, a better board than your opponent, you have, more cards or whatever, higher life points, what you want to do is play defensively, all right? That way your opponent can't catch up to you. So you make cards like Digusto Emerald, you make cards like F-Zero, you make cards like Cyframe Lord Omega, which all help to protect your board, give you back card advantage, protect your board, and sort of defensively disrupt your opponent. And if you're playing, a graveyard deck, then again, replenish your resources, right? Whereas cards like Castel, to remove cards from your opponent's field, might not, have as much use. If you're you have Infusion, you're just 1-for-1ing cards with Castel. That's not too good. You'd much rather have the Emerald for a +1. You don't want to make things like Nightmare Shark, because if you're already winning, the life points, you're just going to get those back next turn. And then something like Scarlight, Red Dragon, Archfiend, is could be kind of considered a defensive card, but generally is more offensive than something like Omega. So if you're winning the game, you want to make these defensive cards to ensure that you gain advantage and make an even more unbreakable board, so that it's impossible for your opponent to catch up to you. And that way, your victory is essentially assured. Now, obviously, that kind of requires some patience, right? You don't just want to, a lot of players are tempted to, if they're winning, just make Castel, make Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend, blow stuff up, and what that leads to is, overextending, basically, and then I can't tell you how many times, I've done that, or I've seen people do that, and then they get, Raigeki, and then they lose, right? Whereas if you make, a field with, these cards, if you just get Raigeki, it doesn't matter, because, you've, plussed and recycled your resources off Emerald. This guy can't even die. This guy's probably off the field, so you don't lose, right? Now, what if you're losing? If you're losing, the opposite is true. If you're losing the game, your opponent has a better board than you, your opponent has more cards, you need to play offensively, all right? You need to play offensively so that you can catch up to your opponent in terms of card economy, life points, whatever, right? Again, it's a little bit different if we have, in the case specifically of Nightmare Shark, when you can just attack for game. But, this is just an example of a more offensive card compared to, something like Utopic Future. So again, if you're losing, you are the one that's obligated to, break your opponent's board, blow up all their monsters, or get rid of problem cards, right? Because how else are you going to catch up to win the game if you don't start breaking boards and dealing damage and stuff like that, right? If you're losing, you have to get back into a point where you can start winning. And then again, as soon as you start winning again, you switch back to being defensive, so that your opponent is then forced to be put on the offensive, right? I think the being defensive when you're winning part is the thing that players usually struggle to grasp the most. I think most people kind of understand that, if you're losing, obviously you need to destroy cards and keep your opponent from having that unbreakable board. But I guess these cards, the defensive cards, are the things that players really struggle with a lot. You know, because like a lot of times they're, you know, gonna go from like a losing position, and so they like have to be offensive. But then the thing is once you break your opponent's board and like once you put yourself in a winning position, you need to start being defensive again right away, right? Like, so if you're playing a high ceiling deck, you know, like pendulums or something, you know, you make your XZs, you make your synchro plays, and you know, attack and stuff. But then in main phase 2, you have to make Dynastor. You know, if you're playing it, you have to make Utopic Future over the Castel, right? That's why cards like Utopic Future I really like, because they let you to go from being like really offensive, you know, if you make something like, you know, Castel Dwell, like, no, not Dweller, I don't want to overlay your Dweller, but, you know, Castel, like another rank 4, to then, you know, to be offensive and then just make, you know, a defensive play by laying Utopic Future off of it, or on top of it. So hopefully this discussion was helpful. Hopefully this helped you understand a little bit about what tempo is and how you can use it to your advantage. So go out there, guys, practice your tempo, determining whether you're winning, losing games, and think about how that can affect your play. So thank you so much for watching, and this is Michael from TYT YuGiOh signing off. Catch you guys next time.